evening, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is the Morbid Symptoms Podcast, and I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke. Dr. Tara Van Dyke, technically, but not a medical doctor, so I can't help you out with any kind of, of those types of issues. Just want to throw that out there in case it considers anybody to take what I say with any kind of seriousness. But you don't have to. Please do question people with any kind of credential. I am here. I'm very happy today that Laura Jones is back with us. She was on I think it was even just last week. And she's agreed to come back on and talk to us about her housing and homelessness campaigning in Scotland, maybe outside of Scotland as well. And of course, we're also going to, talk about the turfing, about, women's rights and how women aren't men and it's okay to say so, and why it's important, why sex is important to for law, and to keep in, that basically just Trump's gender, but I don't want to get too much into that at this point. And then we'll also, if time allows, we're also going to pull up some of the most what the actual AF tweets we've seen from Zionist TERFs, or what we call PERFs, in our growing movement, which is basically Palestinian excluding radical feminists, and also maybe some, not necessarily PERFs, but just some of what the actual what the actual fuck, statements and tweets from what we'll just call ZRAs, so Zionist rights activists, or just surprising things there. So Laura, if you could come on now, thank you. Again, this is Laura Jones. Hey.
Hiya, thanks very much for having me on.
Yes, and what can I say about Laura? I'll just go from her bio that, if I remember correctly, she's a radical feminist. She's an international, so that's cool. We're down with that. International socialist, also down with that. Let's see, what else? Pro-Scottish independence, I think. So that as well. That's right. And also is heavily involved in advocating, campaigning for housing for all, and looking out for the rights and integrity of homeless people. What's the word now? I'm so tongue-tied with the nomenclature. I don't want to say unhoused, but who are dealing with homelessness. Let's just say that, who find themselves without a home, hence homeless. Okay, so Laura, we have a video we can pull up here that just happened today, I think. Do you want to tell us a bit about this as a kind of a segue into the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, so today Glasgow City Council held their all-council meeting, which happens every few weeks, and that is the Scottish Tenants Organisation, the organisation I'm a part of, organised a demonstration in front. The Scottish Government just announced a national housing crisis yesterday. We've been calling for them to do this for it must be about 2 years now. And they also decided to slash our housing budget by about 200 million just recently, in the middle of a housing crisis. So we're all very unimpressed about that. So we were out there today saying we want the housing budget reinstated, and we want the homelessness system in Glasgow to be fixed, because it's been in collapse for years, and everybody's trying to sort of avoid dealing with the situation. But also I wanted to give a voice to some accounts that I've read from women online that I've found who have experienced homelessness, who have had to stay in the B&B and hostel accommodation, which is what they're providing as temporary accommodation currently, and the kind of experiences that they have in that kind of accommodation, because it's something that doesn't get talked about very much.
Okay, so let's go ahead, and we're just gonna I'll link the tweet, the link to the tweet. That's all I can say is tweet. The link to the video, the full video, will also be in the comment section sometime soon. But we'll just go ahead and listen to the first minute or so, and then we'll talk a bit.
So the first, sorry, Tara, the first statement that I read out, it's cut off, I think, at the start. I don't think she'll mind me saying that's Sinead Watson. She's quite a famous detransitioner, and she's been experiencing homelessness. you know, you can imagine the kind of situations that lead to people being homeless, and obviously like massive disruption of the kind that she's had in her life, and the mental health problems and all the rest of it that have arisen from that, that she's been very open, and she's spoken very openly and very powerfully about on her Twitter. But yeah, so I hope she doesn't mind that I read out her words.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and play the first minute or so of this, and then we'll talk about it some more. Let's see if the volume will work. Okay. He's on it. Well, okay. All right. So once we'll just keep on talking, because sometimes, yeah, with these types of things, the volume works and then it doesn't work. But anyway, while we're looking at that, you mentioned that there's a housing crisis in Scotland, and I know that there's a housing crisis, but is that Fido? Fido, we hear your dog barking.
No, that's my dog. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I have no
suddenly
dogs.
woken up.
Okay, it's okay, it's cool. I was just like, anyway, I know that it's kind of, it's one of these things that you hear about it so often that you're just kind of like, oh yeah, there's a housing crisis. Yeah, there's a housing crisis. But you said, but what, if you could say a bit more about the kind of the structure or the duration of the Scottish housing crisis, and is there anything unique about it compared to the one in England, for example?
So I'd say things are quite similar across the board. I mean, I'd imagine they're quite similar all over the world. The problem, as far as I can see it, is neoliberalism, and this is swallowing up of resources by mega corporations that are not accountable to the people who need homes, and are accountable to their shareholders, and governments that increasingly are happy to just hive off our social housing, our infrastructure, or in the case of Scotland, our natural resources, to basically not only sell them off, just give them away to mega corporations instead of having that fund. So for us, there's a twofold problem in Scotland. I mean, you've got problems in housing generally, but the one of the issues we have in Scotland is it's being treated as like the private rented sector, and then there's the social sector, and of course the two bear no relation on each other, as if the problem of a housing supply isn't ultimately the issue that's going to drive rents up. So we have the Green Party, who are just determined to ignore the issue of social housing altogether and focus on trying to make private landlords treat their tenants a bit better, and to have restrictions on them putting up the rent and stuff, which they always find ways. Well, yeah, they always find ways around it. They always find loopholes, and also these things aren't enforced anyway. So it's very difficult to actually see any real progress. But the other side of this is, well, in Scotland, back in the 90s, we had this thing called the stock transfer, which is basically where they decided to take all of our social housing, and they tried to do this all over Scotland. It was defeated in Edinburgh, although it's kind of happened incrementally since then. But as a policy, it was defeated in Edinburgh, but sadly it was successful in Glasgow, where they basically decided to take all the social housing and take it out of public ownership, but put these housing associations in charge of it. And the idea being that these housing associations would be accountable to the communities that they served, that there would be like a community engagement, that there would be tenants would sit on the boards that were making decisions, things like that. So that they, and the idea was increasingly you'd have more and more of these little housing associations that would be run very locally for the benefit of the community. Of course, that didn't happen. That was never the intention. The intention was to privatize our social housing. And so what has actually happened is you've got a couple of massive housing associations, social landlords, nothing social about them, who are just amassing more and more and more property. And the biggest one we have in Scotland is this group called the Weekly Group, who operate all over Europe. They're actually the biggest landlord in the whole of Europe now. And they own thousands and thousands of properties. They also own schools, hospitals, community centres, you name it, businesses, etc., all across Scotland. Now these people are completely unaccountable. They can hike their rents up by 3 times inflation. They can fail to make basic repairs for years on end. They treat their tenants like absolute crap a lot of the time. We have a situation in Scotland where, it's Scotland. We've got a huge damp and mold problem. And we've actually got people who are dying of chronic illnesses. They've got mold situation in their flat. They've reported it time and time again. But groups like the Wheatley Group or Queen's Cross Housing Association is another one that we have to deal with. They just don't care. They would actually rather they pay out more money in non-disclosure agreements than they do on actually fixing the problems in people's flats that are causing them, life-threatening illnesses.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No,
so they treat their tenants like absolute crap. The problem is our political leadership are too scared of them to do anything. Nobody wants to take on the Wheatley Group because they are very big and very powerful. There are Labour and SNP politicians who sit on the board of the Wheatley Group who are completely complicit in all of this. Our local representative, so where I live in the Winefords, we are managed, the housing scheme that I live on is managed by the Wheatley Group. It was bought over by them a few years back from another cash-strapped housing association, which tends to be how these things happen. So they decided to knock down half of our estate. So they took 4 massive 25-story blocks right on our doorstep and decided to blow them up to replace them with far fewer mid-market rent homes. Now, mid-market rent is available to people on a combined income of over 40 grand. So for people in Mary Hill, where I live, it's not affordable for the vast majority of people who live around here. So a whole bunch of people were kicked out of these flats, and they were obviously found other homes. But again, that comes out of the housing stock, so that's just pushing the problem further. Like, you're increasing the number of people needing homes. We've been fighting a battle against them for 2 years because it's an environmentally stupid move. It's socially very damaging. It's taking all those flats out of circulation when they're most needed. But the thing is, because nobody wants to take them on, our councillors have been pretty useless, kind of running for the hills. Like, our political leadership have been terrible. I literally went to Scottish Parliament and yelled at them from the rafters like 3 times about this. With a bunch of, I didn't know you can do this, by the way. I never knew you could do this. In years of activism, I didn't realize you can actually just go to Holyrood and yell at them. And I recommend everybody.
We gotta organize more of that. We gotta organize more.
I know, right?
I'm sure there's like 5 things or more we need to yell at these people about. We should get a group together and just at a certain point, just be like, or just stand up. Like, what is that group? Code
Absolutely. Pink? Well, I'll tell you a story, right? Because it's been a weird journey. So, like,
Laura, can I just pause you for just a second?
Yeah.
I just want to make because I know what you mean by neoliberalism, but some people who watch this may not. And so I'm going to give my kind of semi-brief take on what it is, and then you can come in with anything you want to add. So basically, as I understand, neoliberalism is kind of a word for a period right around the late 1970s to what we're, maybe even still currently in, because people keep on doing these same policies even though they don't deliver what they're supposed to deliver. But basically, it was the idea that anything you can privatize, you should privatize. The market is always the best. Public institutions, social housing, et cetera, is always, it's bureaucratic, it's beggar the neighbor, it's tragedy of the whatever it is. It was basically like anything So in terms of government, it was like anything that could be privatized or outsourced should be privatized and outsourced. The market's better. And the idea was, well, there'll be competition and, prices, supply and demand will meet. And so, because the free hand of the market, which is basically another word for the state and whatever, or different type of state would come into play. So hence you have, the privatization of water, utilities, all this type of stuff. And like you mentioned, so this is the kind of thing, is the idea, this kind of ideology that the state is always can't do really anything bad. The less you have the state involved in or the public involved in, the better. And so just this kind of marketization of everything, that you should approach everything like a market. And that whatever makes the most sense in terms of a market logic, by definition, is the best thing to do. And what we've seen, whether it be in housing or in water or in public transportation or in the post office, is that this has rarely, if ever been the case. And I don't know what you find in Scotland, but when it becomes obvious that what's supposed to happen if the governments do all these things, and we start thinking of ourselves as little individuals, and we have to be self-reliant and good consumers and all this type of stuff. Is that when it doesn't work out, they'll say, well, the state really didn't do it right. It wasn't marketized enough. It wasn't privatized enough. And so it just kind of this kind of revolving around type of thing. So this kind of shift, it started in the late 1970s. There was a famous quote with Margaret Thatcher, there's no alternative, and Reagan, the worst thing you can hear is that we're from the government and here to help you. The Chicago boys went to Chile and did all those fantastic things. And so anyway, long story short, that's how I kind of understand when we say neoliberalism, that's the kind of shift that we're talking about. Would you want to add something to that, or does that seem?
Yeah. And I'd add that it's even worse than that. Like, I guess the idea is, the market is best, and like capitalism will generate the kind of competition, or the kind of it'll find the solutions to these problems. But the thing about neoliberalism is it's even worse than that. It's the state intervening on behalf of corporations. Do you know what I mean? It's not even like let them do it. It's actually, we're going to take public stuff and give it to you because it's that ideological drive towards privatization. And that's the mad thing. It's like, even, I'm not, I don't believe in that model, but even if I did believe in that model, I would still be angry because we're doing it so badly. Do you know what I mean?
No, quite right. I'm glad you mentioned that. Is that it gets sold that way, but actually it's not that you're getting less state, you're getting a different type of state. And so under the guise of all these things, under individualism and freedom and all that, when you follow the money and you follow the concentration of assets and things, like, well, hold on a second, this is this free market isn't free. Somebody's paying for it. And I just want to add one thing before you continue on when we get back to Scotland, is that quite right, similar things going on, not just in the United States and Canada, and I think, to a certain extent, even Europe proper, although Germany tends to be a bit difficult on this, Holland, but even in India as well. But in terms of the United States, you have BlackRock, and you have basically what's happened is whenever there's a shift, you have this huge, you have an opportunity for a transfer of assets up. Yeah, so they call it, they buy these distressed assets or these underwater assets, which usually are affordable housing. They're even doing trailer parks now. BlackRock, it sounds like a smaller version of Wheatley's that you were talking about. Even trailer parks, they're trying to buy up all those trailer parks and rent them out, and get a corner on the market, get the corner on the market of that. And so, of course, when the chips are down, these are the people who get the loans from the banks, not everybody else. And so you just get this, like, under the guise of whatever they're trying to do, the CARES Act in the United States, they basically, the government under it, this huge transfer of assets, especially in terms of properties, so housing and small businesses and all this stuff. So you just get more concentration. And of course, like you said, that comes with more political power. They also have more media power. And, you're just kind of waiting for, like, I don't know, all of us to just, I don't know what you're waiting for, but quite right. I'm glad you pointed that out, that it's, even though it gets sold as like, less state, more individualism and market and all that. But if you look at it closely, you see it's just a different type of state, even or sometimes even more quote unquote state, to kind of rig the game to ensure, pick winners and losers and all this stuff. So that type of thing. Anyway, so when you were mentioning, you mentioned again, I think it's great that's something that everyone should know, is that you can go and to things at Holyrood. I don't know if you can go to, you probably can't go to Westminster, but you could probably go to maybe smaller, I don't know what you can do in, you can't, so you can go to Holyrood, but you can't, but they won't let us into Westminster then.
No, I don't think you can go and yell at them.
No, that's too bad. You have to wait till they come outside or go to their fancy places and be like, no. But what I wanted to say is that so is there just this total denial? Is it just cowardice? Because like you mentioned, it seems like you can, and you're in the thick of it. You're like, okay, this isn't working. It's only getting worse. Are they just going to like continuously pretend that somehow it's just going to magically?
Well, we have a neoliberal government. We have a government that we have had the same party basically in power for 14, 15 years now. As obviously an independent supporter, I was very enthusiastic about that at the start. Having an SNP majority felt like, there was a momentum towards what we wanted. Unfortunately, it was taken over by my favorite comedian calls them the gentrified mafia, basically. The Green SNP coalition has just been a neoliberal nightmare. They failed on all the progressive stuff that they promised to deliver on: land reform, climate targets, retrofitting, housing, council tax reform, like all this stuff, total failure. More children in poverty, more drug deaths, more homeless, all the rest of it. And also, the rise of the far right, which luckily hasn't translated into anything electorally in Scotland yet, but is all the same reason for concern. So yeah, we're all pretty angry about them.
Would that really be worse? I mean, if you got some sort of scary quote unquote far right wing government in Scotland, I agree with you that on the face of it that's not a good thing. But then the people who have been quiet would probably be less quiet. I mean, I'm thinking about it in terms of
possibly. I think
because if these guys are
it's
sucky,
a different
having the sucky guys in there. I mean, might as well, I don't know.
I mean, like I'm of the opinion at this point that our leaders are not as incompetent or as stupid as some of us believe, and that they're actually perfectly aware that their actions are playing into the hands of the far right, that they are handing the far right talking points, for example, housing, which has been exploited by the far right for years and will continue to be so. I think they know that, and I think they're quite happy for a few Raj alt-right groups to emerge and to start kicking up trouble in front of hostels that are housing refugees, because it gives an opportunity for them to come out on Twitter or whatever and make statements saying, oh, I don't like racism, racism's really bad. And then there are middle-class voters who are shielded from the realities of homelessness and haven't got a clue about the situation of social housing go, oh, well done. And they keep voting for them, and they keep feeling all nice and woke. And look, aren't we good for helping the refugees? I think it's deliberate. I think the Green Party are perfectly happy to exploit this and to foment culture wars. I think they've been doing it on the trans issue. They've been doing it on race. They've been trying to do it on abortion here in Scotland. They're trying to pit people against each other and make their activists come out smelling like roses and make them look like the progressive group. They are not a progressive group. As I told you, they just went and cut our bloody housing budget to pay for bloody cycle lanes that nobody wanted in the middle of a housing crisis.
This sounds, I guess I'm not, I don't know why I wanted Scotland to be different. I want someplace to be different.
Oh, I want it. We all want it to be different. We really do.
It's the same thing. And I think that, the Democrats are playing the same game in the United States. The Dutch parties I'm familiar with play the same game. Labor plays the same game. Some of Labor. I mean, there's some breakaways who are not. India with the Congress Party, they play the same game. And it's like, although they've been out of power for like 12 years, but yet they continue to play the same game. And it's just like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's just the cynical, just they talk the talk, they have some accoutrements, and then they do fuck all. But like you said, sorry, people, if I say the F-bomb, I'm sorry. I should say flip-flop.
I think it's a kind of topic that it's worth swearing about.
Well, no, I mean, I have no problem with swearing. I know some people don't like to watch sweary stuff. And so my kids are a bit older now, so I don't have, if I let something fly, they're not going to like start repeating it on the loop. So they know, like, that. So, but I used to say all kinds of things like, what the flip-flop? And, and I just, but anyway, what the F? Can't say that. Anyway, yeah. Sorry. Yes. Venal, nasty politicians. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, it's so weird because if you just watch this and you watch the quote unquote mainstream media, you think that most people don't see it or they don't realize it. But when I talk to people face to face or face to face like this, the vast majority are like, yeah, I think I don't really just get kind of apathetic or demoralized. Like, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like, sometimes I wonder, it's so weird to me, just psychologically, not to get too far off the topic. But for example, so I agree with what you just said, that it's not like they're just like, oh, we don't know. I mean, they can see what's going on, but for whatever, clearly, while it's not working out for the vast majority of people, it's working out quite well politically and economically for them. So, and they, like you said, they get to look, they're like, oh, we're not racist. We're not this. We're perfectly fine with people, falling into poverty and the housing problems and all this other stuff, but we're not going to say any bad names. So, or whatever. But so they know that if they go on these programs, so I'll just say Piers Morgan, for example, or maybe he doesn't know, and I'll just say BBC, could be CNN, MSNBC, all that stuff. And the people they're going and talking to, they know it's bullshit. The audience, less, I mean, maybe not, well, just for the sake of argument, knows that it's bullshit, but yet it keeps on going. So it's like, they know it's bullshit, the interlocutors know it's bullshit, we know it's bullshit, but it's just, so you think like, who is this performance for? Mm-hmm. Unless everybody thinks the other people believe, maybe, I don't know, but it's just amazing to behold. And yeah. Anyway, so I totally agree on that point that that whether it be the Green Party or the Labour Party or the Democratic Party, they're quite aware. They keep on doing it because it works. If they get elected enough, or if they get kicked out, if things get too bad, and they can be out of the seat of power for a while and go work as lobbyists or consultants, or go on being a news pundit or write a book or whatever, and then come back again later on, like that Cameron dude, David Cameron, or whoever. I'm sure Boris Johnson will emerge again at some point.
Oh God.
Who knows? And people will be like, oh well, it's comfortable. It's yeah. So it's just yeah. Politics is real, and yet no even smattering of left power anywhere, like actual political power anywhere.
No, and that's the main problem. As my friend likes to say, the left is dead and something else is wearing its skin. Which I think is a really apt way of putting it. Like, so we had the demolition on our scheme, on our housing estate, was announced like a week before Christmas, I think 2021. In I'd say January or February 2022, so like a couple of months later, as we were trying to gather our strength and figure out how we were going to fight this terrible move. And anyone that cares about social housing in Scotland can see that this was a really important flashpoint, because what they were planning on our estate, they have planned all across Scotland. So it's not just us. The Wheatley Group have been directly, so the Wheatley Group have been directly or indirectly responsible for demolishing about 40,000 social homes now. And they have employed a permanent demolition officer who's going to operate across a whole region of Scotland. So it's not just us. This is a plan that they have for all over the place. So it's a really important fight for us. And we were a member.
Sorry, I just sorry to interrupt you, but this one demolition officers. I'm like, I thought I only had those in like the mega cities of the global south, because I spent, just an aside, I spent quite a bit of time studying in the Mumbai region and also Delhi and whatnot. And you would always, like, every municipality or something have a demolition office, an encroachment office, all this stuff. I didn't realize that there were demolition officials. And I guess their main thing they demolish is affordable housing. Is that what we're...
All our homes.
Yeah.
That's what they demolish. And they use public money to do it. They don't even have to pay for it themselves. Brilliant. It's just a virtuous cycle. Everybody gives each other the money. But so our little residents union.
Is there any reason to have any kind of hope? Any kind of I guess I should go back a bit to get some numbers. Do you have any idea what the housing shortage is in Scotland right now? Like how many, like, affordable housing shortage?
So what are the homelessness figures? We had the recent homelessness figures just now. There's 10,000 children in temporary homeless accommodation, or waiting to be housed. There are, I'm trying to remember what the numbers on the social waiting list are, but tens of thousands. It's just backlogged. The homelessness system is, they can't deal with people. They just don't have the homes for people, basically. It's really bad. Lots of homeless children, lots of rough sleepers, just thousands and thousands of people on the waiting list for a social house.
Sorry, a bee came in, so I was like, ah.
And then also people are really struggling to get a private rent as well, so it's just across the board. It's really difficult.
It was I'm not, thankfully, we're okay. Not doing fantastic, but what was it? It was it 6 months ago? The place we were renting, we got first they said, yeah, we're fine with extending it again. And then like a couple months later, it was like, no, the landlord's going to sell it and you need to be out in 2 months. And already we were so overpaying for this house. I mean, it was just as an aside, when we came here from Holland, we lived in the edge of Rotterdam. So not like in the middle of Rotterdam, Holland, but on the edge of it. And we probably had maybe a 1,400 square foot house. And I think the mortgage is like 800 euros a month, 850 euros a month. It's like, okay, which is cool. Maybe it was 9, maybe went up to 9, I can't remember. So they come here, and the cheapest thing I could find was like 800 square feet for 1,150 pounds a month. It's like, I didn't have a lot of time, so we had to shift, and so I was like, okay, well, we'll get there, and then we'll find something else. But it was just, it just was expensive everywhere, and so then we had to find a different place, and so end up finding a place. And of course, now my kids are really they don't want to leave where they're currently at. And so I found a place was probably like 125 square more feet, but 1,550 pounds a month. I mean, it's just, and you read these things like, oh, you should only be paying like 30% of your, income on your rent, and at most. And I'm like, well, you should tell. And you just know that every year it's going to be, and the real estate people. I don't know if this is interesting or not. And Fido, you can cut this out later if it's boring. But I remember it was right during COVID, I think, and they wanted to raise the rent from 1,150 to 1,300. And I was like, And I'm like, I'm thinking, great. Now I'm like, I'm just on principle, like, I'm not going to pay that. We'll have to find something else. And the kids had to freak out and whatnot. And anyway, so I'm talking to the guy from the realtor, and he's like, well, no. And because I basically wrote in an email, nice enough, saying, I really, I am not convinced, right? I don't agree with the numbers you have produced for the typical rent and the area that we live. And he started to get all like, well, I am, this, and I know this and that. I go, you're a realtor and you have an incentive to make money. And so what you have not told me is, what's your typical 3-bedroom house in this area? Because not every 3-bedroom house is the same. So if you're trying to tell me that the average rent and a year into COVID is this, I'm like, yeah, sorry. And he eventually dropped it down to, I think, what was it? They wanted just 100 more a month, and I was still like, my husband's like, oh, well, let's just do it. It's let's just do it. And I was just like, but they really have you, because and even though the prices are so high, I was like, the first few places we looked at we had to find a place quick, because you only get 2 months. I would go and look, and I'd be like, okay. And then I would, like, maybe in half an hour later, say I want to submit the application. And it was like already too late. They were just going like hotcakes. I'm like, who has all the money to live in this place? Maybe they don't, they're just trying to find it. And this is like, and we're not living high on the hog, but if it was somebody who, even just a little bit less money, I mean, I don't know what you do. You have to live so far away from where there's work. It's either I mean, it's just, and like you said, it's like this idea that it's always like, well, we need to encourage more private sector housing development. It's like, why? It's going to work this time.
Charlie, come on.
I'm like, well, okay. But yeah, I know. So I guess it wasn't just in England then when Thatcher and neoliberalism came in, and it was about, and because there used to be quite a bit of social housing, council housing. So that was also was taken out or became, backward, I guess, also in Scotland.
Yeah, well, they haven't been building enough. Well, they haven't been building any, basically. And what we had is, been given off to these housing associations. That was Labour that did that in Scotland. But
yeah, that's also, that reminds me, when you mentioned that, and you mentioned before that that Greens and Labour and whatnot can get away with things other people can't. It's the same thing that you go back and that, for example, Bill Clinton in the United States, he totally gutted welfare, and embraced the right to work, and from welfare to work and all this stuff. And people would say, probably looking back, especially if a Republican had tried to have done that, no go. So it's, and we see this now. People are saying, and who knows? I mean, it's hard to know how divided along red and blue the United States are. But people are saying, well, if it was Trump in office doing this nastiness, supporting this genocide in any possible way he could, more of the quote unquote left, whatever that is, would be up in arms about it. But since it's Trump, since it's Biden, I don't know how. Maybe people are that cynical, and because they can associate the right, I don't know, and it's somehow that it's a party that's doing it, that's so PC, that's so anti-racist, that's so inclusive, and all this stuff. That somehow, I don't know, they're able to do the most nastiest shit, and somehow people just think, well, they really, if they, it's such a shame. They feel bad. We really, and you see this to kind of just to transition a bit to the Palestine issue, that you have this nasty woman. And I'm sorry, I know feminists, sorry, but there are some nasty women. I can't remember her name, but she has long red hair. She was in the Obama administration, and I think she was the UN advisor, and now she's like the head of US aid or something. And so while we're selling all these providing all these bombs and all this cover to Israel, she's on there saying, it's so important that we're really working hard to get aid to the needy, to the people suffering in Gaza. And, we're going to do this and that. And I'm thinking, again, like, she can't possibly think this is true. I mean, and maybe we just have to accept that some of these people are just sociopaths. They have these aims, and whatever gets in the way of the aim, it doesn't matter. Sometimes I think I should go full on Alex Jones and be like, maybe they are trying to get rid of like half the population. You know? Maybe Alex is onto something. I mean, maybe the side effects to the vaccines were not an incident, or an accident. It's like maybe all this nastiness in our food and sterilizing kids that say, the transient kids and all this stuff. You're just like, well, maybe they are trying to kill us off. I mean, I don't know. But of course, even though it's easy to go there sometimes, that doesn't really like no politics or nothing comes from that. I mean, it's just like, the globalists are coming to get us, to replace us, or etc. But sometimes it's just like, and again, it's so weird because they're saying they're using a certain discourse, and they get a United Benton kind of diversity array of neoliberal ghouls to tell us this stuff, and they seem so like, well, they couldn't do anything bad. I mean, not on purpose. Like, well, maybe. Not that bad and good is really helpful with politics, but it dovetails in there. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, what a shit show everywhere you look. I mean, there's a couple of politicians, but then you think like, even as minimal of a kind of like an old school democratic socialist project that Bernie Sanders was on, they took him out. I mean, it was like, and you could see what they were doing. It was so obvious.
Yeah,
it was like Obama made a phone call after that second primary, and all of a sudden people are dropping out left and right, and then it's like, oh, Bernie's a sexist, and he doesn't care about black people, and all this, and people are just like, and then repeating it all on the thing, and you're like, Jesus, and then trying to tell us they're democracy.
Well, this is democracy. Yeah. So this is the point, I think. That I'd most like to make is that identity politics is like kryptonite for the left, and our leaders know this, and this is absolutely a deliberate strategy. So we had the demolition of the 4 tower blocks on the Wynford announced, right? This is £100 million land grab by the Wheatley Group. This is worth millions, potentially billions to them in the future. A couple of months after that, myself and a whole bunch of my neighbors and the fella that is most active in this campaign are doxxed and cancelled for being TERFs. So basically, we were members. Our little residents' union was affiliated to a national tenants' union called Living Rent. And we were the Wynford branch of Living Rent. Shortly after we decided to start fighting this multi-million-pound land deal, someone pops up on the Living Rent national Facebook page, names myself and 7 or 8 other, one man, and the rest of us were all women, collateral damage, with our names, full names, photograph of me taken in front of my house, because we'd do door chapping around the area to find out about issues, and then we'll maybe take a little photograph at the end to be like, oh, we were out door chapping tonight. So they went on our page, took all the photos they could find of us, called us TERFs, CUNTs, all the horrible words you could think of, acid, tagged all of the exec members and staff members of Living Rent to say these people must be removed from the organization. They must be kicked out immediately. This, by the way, was because a woman who was actually on the board of Living Rent, she'd been elected to the board, somebody had discovered that she was a TERF by looking at her private Facebook posts, and had then gone on the housing advice page. Actually, it was for housing advice, believe it or not, but people who were subjected to this nonsense. Somebody went on and said, no, this woman's a TERF, you have to get rid of her. And so this poor woman, Sarah, sat for ages thinking, how do I write the perfect, thing to try to be like, look, I care about tenants issues and I care about housing and that's my real thing. But, I also care about sex-based rights. And they absolutely just, took her photo, names, all the rest of it. So the Living Rent organizers and staff members came on and, oh, by the way, this post came from a non-binary fella called Brian, who has never been identified. So this person, we have never been able to verify that this person exists. But on that basis, an entire organization was split. We were kicked out. They tried to tell us to hand over the keys to our Facebook page and everything to them so they could set up their own branch with people from Edinburgh instead of the people who actually lived in our community. They started telling us, you're not allowed to have a residents' union anymore. So we said, well, no, screw that. We're just going to go our own way. So we did that, and we've been fighting this demolition for 2 years. We've held it off in the courts. We've got them to promise to save our community centre. We've got them to commit to a lot more social housing, all the rest of it. But yeah, no, we're still fighting, and we're going to continue to fight. Living Rent, in the same time, has simply become a mouthpiece for the Green Party. They don't even mention social housing anymore. They don't talk about social housing. All they talk about is the importance of their private rent legislation, that is a Green Party policy, and the importance of reforming the Butte Agreement, which is the agreement between the SNP and the Greens that kept the Greens in power. So this independent tenants organisation that is supposed to serve the interests of tenants in Scotland purged all its feminists, purged everybody that wanted to fight the demolition of social housing, and now they function as a mouthpiece for the Green Party, who up till last week were, in power.
But everybody respects place pronouns, and that's what's most important.
So yeah, corporate espionage, total fucking corporate espionage, and really, really let down by a lot of former comrades, some of whom were neighbours of mine who knew what had happened. I spoke to them about what happened. They looked me in the eye and said, Laura, that's terrible. That's no way to organise in a working class area. You can't go around. This identity politics stuff is so unhealthy. Then they turned around and sent me to the gulags. Do you know what I mean? They sided with Living Rent. They said, yep, absolutely, get those hideous TERFs out of here. They wouldn't answer the phone calls. They refused to talk to me on demonstrations. They pretend I don't exist on Twitter. Some of these are people I've known for up to 20 years. But screw them. They're all captured. They've all got nice cushy jobs working for the unions now, and the unions do nothing but suck up to the Greens about issues like the trans stuff. Probably none of them believe in it at all, but they're perfectly happy to pretend they do, to pretend like women, you and me, don't exist. But also what we found is that like these total raj environmental activists came to our aid at a time when our own socialist comrades, tenants' rights, interested type people were turning their backs on us and wouldn't promote our campaign, wouldn't come to our events, wouldn't mention it. They'd go to events and talk about housing, and they'd talk about, oh, it's terrible, the demolition's going on in the abstract, without mentioning the biggest campaign that's been happening in Glasgow for the last 2 years. It's been all over the news. So they did all they could to ignore us, but actually it was these ultra woke, hippie, this is rigged, the Just Stop Oil offshoot kind of activists up in Scotland who do a lot of activism around the environment, but also trying to tie it into like social issues and the cost of living and food crisis and stuff. So they came to our aid, and they did demonstrations with us, and they occupied the high flats, and they kicked up a whole lot of fuss. So some people on the left disgrace themselves for careerist reasons. What it seems to be is basically if someone's paying your salary, if you've got funding, you're captured. If you don't have funding and you're just a Raj who's doing it because the world's on fire and you care, then you're not going to care so much.
Yeah.
So actually it is possible to be a TERF on the left. I've been doing it for 2 years, and you get some weird looks. It's not easy, and especially if you suffer from social anxiety like I do, it's not always fun, but it's possible. You can do it. You can turn up, you can grab a megaphone, and people will politely allow you to be there.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's just, and of course, your situation has its uniqueness, but we know that this has happened many times, and the witch hunts, and then and a lot of comrades, so to speak, on the left, especially if they're guys, just don't think it's that serious. Oh, well, so what if someone got run out of a university job? Or, what's the big deal if someone got, and I'm like, well, if it happened to you, I'm pretty freaking sure you think it's a big deal. And it's also, my thing is, like, it's like, just because the quantity isn't up here yet doesn't mean you shouldn't be freaking paying attention. Look what is happening, And if you think it can't touch you or somebody around you, think again. Not that it means too bad that sometimes that has to be the case. But it's like you have this crazy ideology that has swept through everything. And if you really believe on the left that this is about the pronouns and the streets and the tweets and the sheets, haha, Fido got in there, you were high as a kite.
Yeah.
The people... All this doesn't happen, and Jennifer Billick has talked about that, although she never says anything about Palestine, either for or against, probably, with care, I don't know. It's like, but she's like, do you really think that all these changes in law, all this stuff is because of a handful of people who think they either want to be or actually think they should be, either in the wrong body or want to be? You really think that heaven and earth has moved for that? Oh no. And when you see what this allows for, I mean, I don't know if they, I don't know, like, I'm not saying it was cooked up in the lab, particularly for this purpose, but it works quite well with that. And it's just like, my God, and it's like, can you imagine, before you heard of the word TERF, if someone had told you like 10 years ago, there's going to be, if it's found out that women dare to say that men aren't actually women, even if they say so, and there's no magic prefixes, that you're fucking out, and at best you could hope for is people off the record saying, oh yeah, that's really terrible, but dude, not standing with you and saying this is bullshit. Even if you agree in magic prefixes, okay? Even if you think that somehow when, the soul enters the body, that it can be, misgendered, like the angels get, like, they're high or they're on strike or they just think it's funny, don't know. Even then, you should be like, this is crazy. It's crazy. I mean, just this kind of, I don't even know what you want to call it. It's just this contradiction, like this left fascism, or the fascism, like, it's used a lot of it, but totalitarianism, and then I think then I start thinking like, oh, maybe I was too dismissive of the Frankfurt School work on authoritarian personalities and why the revolution didn't happen. And I'm like, maybe that wasn't so unique to Germany. And these fair weather leftists, these professional whatever, who were fine and dandy, and I'll use the Palestinian thing because there's a lot of overlap here. They'll raise your voice, they'll shine a light on your issue and all this stuff until you become any kind of problem for them, and then you're out. And then it's like, the victims have to be victims. They can't stand up for themselves. They can't do anything that, then it's too problematic. And not about, it has nothing to do with socialism or this or that, the other, all this stuff. And I'm just like, you know what, with leftists like this, I don't want to be in your leftist group. I don't even know what to call myself anymore. And people will say like, well, are you a leftist? Are you a Marxist? I'm like, fuck if I know. I mean, what does this even mean anymore?
Well,
it's like, I don't
know. What we had across the board, because, this took up like a good few months of our lives, and it was pretty upsetting initially, actually quite scary, and then, it's just, it's a lot. But one thing is that every time, I know, every time we would tell this story to somebody, they would end up going, what does that have to do with housing? Every time it was the same question again, and we felt like having that put on a t-shirt. It was like, nothing. It has nothing to do with housing. There was no, the thing is, it wasn't even having turfy opinions. It was the failure to adequately condemn the one person who did. Okay. So it was that we were saying, can you please not call her a CUNC? I mean, obviously obviously they'd gone and checked that I was, turfy, and that my friend was
So,
turfy, and like they'd
so
look
you
at our
failed the
Facebooks
test.
after and
What it
stuff.
was. You failed the test.
Yeah, so we failed the test by saying, can you please
Burn
not
the witch.
use online
You must be
public
burned.
platforms to
Yeah.
call women a cunt, because that's not acceptable behavior or language. And they were like, no, that's fine. They actually told me it was Glasgow, and that's like parochial, people say that all the time, so it's not a thing. It's like, mate, there's a context. You don't just say that.
I don't think they were saying it in a nice way.
No, indeed.
I love those turf coats. Sorry. They're my favorite type.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the
Sorry,
term
I
of
got angry and
endearment.
I lost my yeah. Oh dear.
Well, no, I can appreciate that because I come from the States, and so the cunt word has one connotation, and that's it, and it's not good. So it's
Yeah. It's
so when
not
I
it's
hear
not a
saying
word
that,
that
I'm
you would
like,
expect.
Jesus, woo.
It's not a word that you would expect to hear in a union meeting, or your residents union, or whatever. Absolutely.
I don't know anymore. We can't take anything for granted anymore. Who knows?
But yeah,
it's also
but that's the thing. One of the things, that's what I was going to say, is that we continue to. I mean, there was no question ever that that anybody would be excluded. There was, for example, there was no women's group to exclude anyone from. Do you know what I mean? There was no question that if somebody was trans or non-binary identified and they came looking for housing advice, that we would deny it to them, because there's nothing like that. But one of the things that we kept hearing, particularly from this group, completely not backed up by any statistical, evidence or reports or anything, is that trans people are disproportionately affected by homelessness, and therefore you should just automatically just be, really like, sympathetic to the trans cause, because they're so affected by this.
Oh my God.
Nonsense. They're not. So two of those people that they cancelled are people that have worked extensively in homelessness for decades. One of whom works for homelessness databases. There is no massive, statistically, trans people are not overrepresented in homelessness. The major reasons for becoming homeless are A, you run out of money to pay the rent, and B, family breakdown, where it's very often the woman who ends up homeless as a result. So, like, all of these people have seen thousands of women who've been made homeless as a result of domestic violence, for example. Trans people who were kicked out by their parents for being trans. Kids being kicked out by their parents is not a major reason for homelessness. It's just not.
Well, I don't understand. Well, I mean, I understand why they do it, because then they can kind of, it's also great for patronage politics, because the more little groups you have, the more you can kind of, um, cynically manipulate that for various reasons. Because it seems to me that whether it be healthcare or whether it be homelessness or whatever, it should be like there's an easier way to, because I can understand that, okay, we have this many units and we have this many people, we have to decide how we're going to prioritize. Why do I need to know anything about anybody's sexual practices or identity to be able to do that? Or the color of their skin, or what religion they are, or anything like that? To me, it'd be more like, like how, well, I don't have to tell you. I'm sure you could tell me the factors, like about how you prioritize who gets what housing, who gets prioritized over whoever else. The idea that it should be somebody, based on if you're non-binary or not, it's just ridiculous.
No.
I mean, I don't under, I mean, I cannot, and I'll even, I could, like, let's say that I found myself, I gotta leave. My husband goes crazy, whatever. So there I am with and my son stays with him, and I take my two, my other ones, and I need a place, let's say it's really, like, really, really bad. And somebody else, or some other people, who are also wanting to get on social housing or to get help, don't have it nearly economically or materially bad as I do, but they're trans, or they're, I don't know, Iranian, or I don't know what it is. So, they get it first because of that. It'd be like, what? It should be based on material need and the circumstance. Is the person, really who's most likely to end up on the street, whose life's in danger. That could be also life-threatening. But the idea that any of this stuff should have anything to do with how housing is allocated seems bizarre to me, unless you're trying to play, like you said, these identity politic games. Then, then you get, and that's also, useful. Yeah, oh, I care about trans housing. Well, there's not a lot of trans people already. I'm sorry, trans people. Don't want the church to get mad at some of the church to get mad at me. So it's already a small group. So the people that within that group that are in danger of being on the street, so small. But if you want to focus on that, then you get. I mean, the economic input to the cultural clout payback. Mm-hmm. You can kind of see why they would do it.
Yeah. Well, there's two other elements to this. So, yeah, generally it doesn't matter. The one thing that I'm really concerned about is that because feminism has been so unfashionable this last 10 years, I think there's a lot of political points that aren't being made that women might otherwise be making. One of them being we've got this epidemic of so many people now squished into substandard homelessness accommodation in hotels and B&Bs. They're all mixed sex. So there is no female-only homelessness accommodation, and you've got women getting sexually assaulted, you've got women getting attacked, you've got women dying in these places. You've also got children, families with children staying in these places. They're full of drugs and drug dealers and all the rest of it. So there are specific needs that women experiencing homelessness often have that are just not being met by the current system. They are also disproportionately affected psychologically and health-wise by being homeless, that women and children. So it has like a very profound effect on them. So that's one thing that's very unfashionable. For example, there's no women-only emergency accommodation. So there is asylum-seeking women.
Has that always been the case, or is this a new thing?
I'm not sure if there used to be. There's women's aid, so there is women's aid, but that's it's not. You don't get referred by the same system, and there's less places for women's aid for sure. Mm-hmm. But they have a what you call a key worker thing where it's much more secure, at least in theory, and the guys can't come in and bother you and stuff. But the hotels and the B&Bs are just doors open. Nobody's really checking on you guys wandering into your room all the time, that kind of thing. The thing is, women will often tell you that women don't necessarily want women-only accommodation. A lot of them don't want it because they want their boyfriends or their sons or their male relatives or friends to be able to visit them or give them a hand with stuff. So a lot of the time women wouldn't opt for women-only accommodation. But the problem is, I think it should be available as an option. There should be some provision for women who are, for example, escaping domestic violence and all the rest of it. So that's something that's really being ignored, and I think the untrendiness of feminism is probably partly to do with that. Another thing is sex for rent. So you've got this huge uptick in creepy landlords offering women a place to stay in exchange for sex. And our government is actually woefully behind the UK government on this. Suella Braverman, of all people, actually tried to bring in legislation to curb this, whereas our government, there's like a think tank, there's one of those committees for thinking about it that's been sitting and thinking about it for years, and eventually they'll come up with some sort of proposal. It's one of those. The SNP loves those, by the way.
Yeah.
Spends so much money on advisors and. Yeah, just kick it down the line, kind of thing. The sex work. Sorry, but how sex work is awfully trendy among all these people, right? So Living Rent, this tenants union, when we were still members, we were shocked at one point to find that they'd put in a submission to the Scottish government saying that Living Rent as an organisation opposed the implementation of the Nordic model. Because it might lead to landlords being prosecuted, and that would negatively impact sex workers. It was unbelievable. It was wait, why are you making the landlord's argument for them? I don't understand this. Yeah, they're basically saying that the Nordic model was bad because it might affect landlords, and what's bad for the landlord is bad for the poor sex worker tenant that's living with them. So at the time we wrote to Living Rent, we were like, sorry, what meeting was that decided in? Like, we don't remember ever seeing that advertised. Did you discuss this at all? No, of
Imagine
course
being
they
the guy
didn't.
who put that in.
Oh no, just like somebody on the board like
Look at
reckoned
that guy.
something, and they just typed it out, stamped Living Rent on it, and sent it off to the Scottish government, with all our names attached to it. And we were like, okay, that's not great. We would actually like clarification now on where the organisation stands on sex for rent.
Sex
We
for
never
rent.
got that
Can you
clarification.
imagine?
Never got that clarification.
And you just know there's some quote unquote feminists like, well, who are you to decide how a woman should use her body to pay for rent or not? I mean, come on.
Because that's
And it's
not
just,
coercion at all.
just an aside here is that my favorite thing whenever this sex workers work comes up, especially if it's a dude, but it doesn't have to be a guy. It could be some woman who's like, maybe she dabbled in a weekend. I mean, I don't know. Like they all think it's like, pretty women call girls or something. I always have the same thing to say. I'm like, listen, you go to the dock tonight and you suck 5 dicks for 20 pounds a pop. And then you report back to us how sex workers work. You do that, and I will sit down and listen to what you have to say. Until you do that, not interested. Just not interested. It's like, please. I don't know what they have in their mind. I can't hear you.
Completely divorced. Just completely divorced from reality.
I mean, and that's where I totally rock with Julie Bindel on this, but on the Palestinian women and children, or just humanity in general, then it's a different thing. Oh my God. Well, Laura, I love you. I knew I loved you, and now I'm like you're my sister from another mister. And we are at an hour and 7 minutes. So I mean, this is such an important issue and of course, a lot of things kind of come in and out of it as well. But how are you feeling? What's your mojo like? What's your?
I'm good. I'm feeling like I need another coffee, but I'm happy to move on to the bitching about Zionists
cool.
stage.
So okay, so for those of you tuning in, we're gonna take like 10 minutes? 10-minute break or cool. Yeah? So we'll take about 10 minutes and then we will come up with the second part of our we'll merge and do the second part where we get on our ruthless criticism and mocking of Zionist turfs and Zionists in general, but we like to focus on pro-Zionist turfs for obvious reasons, because we thought that they were very concerned about women and children, and it turns out that only certain women and children are they concerned about. So they're our favorite targets of, not favorite, I mean, you gotta, what can I say? I wish this wasn't the situation, but it is what it is. So this has been the Morbid Symptoms podcast. I've been talking with the lovely Laura Jones, who's been fighting the good fight in Scotland, focusing a lot on the housing issues and how there's more and more demand or need for social housing and less of it's being provided, and how it's all seems to be about whatever benefits the largest landholders and their political connections is what happens. And we've talked about some other things as well. We're going to take a 10-minute pause for the cause. We're going to come back and we're going to look at some of the what the actual fuck tweets of the week or tweets of the last 7 months. Maybe some classics might pop up as well. So please come back. We're going to be back up in 10 minutes. And of course, after the live stream, this will also be on YouTube and what's the other one? Rumble. Forever and ever until someone gets mad and takes us down. So Laura, I'll see you in about 10 minutes. And everybody else, I hope to see you back on the interwebs, whatever it's called. I don't know how it works. It just works. So see you in a couple of minutes. Let's see if Fido's still there. Is he going to take us out? Fido's left. Okay. Bye.
I'm in.
There you are.
I'm still in. I'm still awake.
You were not listening. Okay.
No, it was lovely.
It's fine. We're gonna take a 10-minute break, and then we're gonna come back and do the perfs and zerfs tweets.
Great.
Fido has a lovely lady who he has to spend some time with. So if you need to leave, we can of course do this on our own. But if you're with us,
it's fine. I'm already set up. I don't want to leave you now, and you'll have to do the whole thing on yourself. It's fine. I can ask
See, look
a
at
night
him.
out.
Look, and I'm telling you, friends of the show. We only have a few now, but when we have later, you got to give up for Fido because I'm telling you, he's the best pro bono executive producer that I've ever had. He's the only one I've ever had, but he is the best. Okay,
Thank you.
You'll go ahead and take us out then, Fido?
Yeah, I end stream then.
End stream, yeah, baby.
Okay. Very good.
Back in 10 minutes.